Hi guys, in this video we'll go over chapter 4 in your chapter, in your textbook. So chapter 4 is really based on chapter 3. A lot of information in chapter 4 is related to supply demand. So make sure you review chapter 3 carefully and then let me know if any questions. Okay, all right, so let's get started. Now we're going to talk about the labor and financial market. So this is really based on the supply demand for the labor and financial market. But what really that you should be learning in this chapter is something called a price control, right? Because in both the labor and financial market, there are some factors or market forces that's preventing the market from reaching an equilibrium. So let's see what they are. Right? So first, let's look at our labor market. So labor market, think about a hospital or nurses, right? So let's say in a hospital, hospital demand nurses, um, but who are the nurses? They are our people, right? They're your neighbors, your friends, your family. So in the market for goods and services, what we used to think about, the demand is on the consumer side, supply is on the business side. But in the labor market, you're going to see the two roles switched. That become the household, the individuals would become the supply of labor, and then the companies, hospitals become the demand for labor. All right, so law of demand stated that as the price increases, we're going to see a lower quantity demanded, and as the price decreases, we're going to see a higher quantity demanded. Now, when we apply this to the labor market, same concept. It just says, price of labor, which is just wage, right? So how much we're paying people for, that's the price of labor. So wage increases, then we're going to see people want to work more hours. And then vice versa, if wage decreases, so wage goes down, then people want to work less hour, right? So same thing as our law of demand and the law of supply, similar as well. But again, we're replacing with our prices with wage. So as wage increases, company want to hire less people, and as wage decreases, then company want to hire more people. All right, so the equilibrium, that's the intersection between our supply demand. So the wage and then also number of people hired in the economy is really determined by the intersection between our supply for labor, so all the individuals in the economy, and then versus the demand for labor. That's the companies, the firms who are hiring people. So when you look at this diagram for our supply demand, on the vertical axis, that's not price anymore. On the vertical axis, that's your wage or salary. And on the horizontal axis, we have our quantity of labors. So in this market for nurses, the intersection between supply and demand, so at this point, so that is about what, like $85,000. So it looks like our equilibrium wage is $85,000. That's right here, that's equilibrium wage. And then the quantity for labors, so it looks like we're employing about 42-ish, 41,000 people at $85,000 of equilibrium. Now, however, if the price goes a little higher, so let's suppose the wage is not 85,000. The wage is going to be set at 90,000. Now, at 90,000, we're behaving above our equilibrium. And then from what you learned in the previous chapter, that whenever you go above equilibrium, so price too high, we're going to expect to see a surplus in the market. And in the labor market, you see the same information, because as a higher wage, so wage goes up, then people, employees, want to work more. There are more people coming into the market looking for a job because wage is very, very high. But at the same time, at a higher wage, then this gives companies an incentive to hire less people, because employee become too expensive. Then as a company, I'll be looking for other alternatives to produce this production, right? So we're going to see a higher quantity supplied of labor. We're going to see a lower quantity demand for labor. So at this point here, that is your quantity supplied. And this point here, that is your quantity demand. So the gap between the two, we have our excess supply of labor, or the surplus of labor. And remember, this is also called unemployment, right? So if wage too high, we might see an unemployment in the economy. And then vice versa if the price too low, right? Suppose wage goes down to only 75,000. Now 75,000, that's great for the companies, right? So for hospitals, they're saying, oh look, nurses are cheaper now, so we're gonna hire more nurses. But at the same time, nurses are thinking, hey, that's pretty low wage. I don't want to work over here anymore, right? So all of a sudden we have the reverse situation where a company will hire more people, but there are less people want to work. So we're going to see a shortage of labor, right? So price or wage too high, we're going to see a surplus or unemployment. Price or wage too low, we're going to see a shortage of laborers. All right, so a couple of factors can shift our demand for labor curve. So for one is the demand of output. So for whatever the production is for this industry, that production, so whatever they produce at the end, what the demand for that is, will also impact the demand for the labor for this industry, right? So imagine, think about the labor market for bakers. What if there's a higher demand for bread? Then there'll be more bakeries, higher bakers, so demand for bakers also goes up, right? So number one factor can shift our demand for labor is the demand for the actual production. Number two is education trainings, right? So how trained or skilled our laborers are. So if your labor are very skilled, so you imagine that our nurses are very productive, our doctors are very good, our mechanics are super at their job. If that's the case, then companies want to hire more people because they're very good at it. Now, vice versa, imagine that we don't have the skills that's required, right? So, and then what do companies do? Then they're going to be looking for other alternatives, try to produce the good, right? So higher skilled laborers, higher demand, lower skilled laborers, lower demand. And the technology also impact our demand for labor. So this can be different ways. So you can seek technology that's complement to our labors. So you can also seek technology that's in a competition with laborers. So for example, think about, let's say Walmart, all those self-checkout at Walmart, that's definitely impacting demand for labor, right? So the more self-checkout that the grocery store has, the lower the demand for those, cashiers they have. And that's a competition against our labor. But sometimes you also see the reverse, where the technology is helping employees to make them more productive, and the company might actually hire more people that way. And next, it will be a number of companies. So how many companies are in the market hiring people? And then we have government regulations. So this will be, labor laws. How many hours a person can work? What is the minimum wage for the person? What is the working conditions? Right. So all those requirements government put in the industry can also impact companies' incentive to hire people. And lastly is the price and availability of other input. Right. So again, let's say for my chicken fried rice business, if my chicken and my rice is very cheap, and what do? I want to produce more chicken fried rice. But to produce more chicken fried rice, I need to hire more people, right? So as the chicken and rice become cheaper, the demand for employees goes higher, and that's called the price and availability of other input. Okay, so those factors will impact your demand for labor. And then for the supply for labor, this is on the employees. So how many workers we have that will impact our supply for labor. What is the required education level for the job that also can make certain people qualified or not qualified. So imagine that our government says to be an elementary school teacher, that each new teacher must have a master degree in education. Well, they actually put a very high requirement, so not many people can qualify anymore. Then you're gonna see a lower supply for labor. And lastly is government policy. So this would be the government policy that will place on the incentive of workers, right? So there might be some incentive that says, hey, we're going to increase the benefit for unemployed people. So if you don't have a job, we're going to pay you, let's say, $5,000 a month for, I don't know, 5 years. And if that's the case, then people don't want to work anymore, right? Because what's the point? Now, vice versa, let's suppose government says, if you work, the government actually pay you to work. We actually have a program for that. So in many states in America, for low-income families, the state government actually provide the family like a stipend whenever the family have a job outside of I don't know, in the industry, right? So try to promote incentive to work, right? So those type of policies can influence our supply for labor. All right, so think about technologies. So how those will impact the wage of high skill and low skill worker. So really for the last maybe 15, 20 years, technology has been doing great in the US economy. That with more, robotics, computers, and now AI, that many of the workers that who used to be very, very secure, but now seeing more competition from technologies. So in the last 30 years, we see the high skill workers. So for those who are doing IT, programmers, electricians. So those high skill jobs, their wage in the last 30 years actually increased. But for the low skill job, so those are easily replaced by robotics or technologies, then we see their wage goes down because they're competing, the technology is competing against low skill workers. So this technology here, again, is impacting our high skill, low skill worker differently, okay? All right, so you can go over this. This is what we just said. So for the technologies, it's really decreasing the demand for low skill workers, but it's increasing the demand for high skill workers. Because for technologies, it's making the high skill workers more productive than ever before. And there's also a demand for electricians, programmers, IT people. So that's why the demand for high skill worker went up, but the demand for low skill worker went down. And because they changed the demand, we also see a change in the wage level. So for low skill worker, your wage is going down, but for the high skill worker, your wage is going up. And that's why you guys need to stay in school, get your education. Okay. All right. So next, know what's a minimum wage. So minimum wage is the price floor that employee must be paid. So this would be the minimum price the company can pay somebody for the service. And then for our country right now, US, the minimum wage for everybody is $7.25. The $7.25 per hour. And it depends on where you are. In different industry, you might see a different minimum wage. Let's say for Seattle, the entire city, the minimum wage there is $15 per hour. California is $15 per hour. New York City is also $15 per hour, and then New York State is on the way to become $15 per hour. So many small local municipalities are seeing a higher minimum wage now. But that minimum wage might be a little tricky here because sometimes by having a minimum wage, you might actually hurt the people you're going to help. We're going to talk about this in the next slide, but for now, just thinking, hey, minimum wage might not be the best idea. Okay, it's good, but might not be the perfect idea. And then living wage. Living wage is the amount of the money the employee, a full-time employee, need to make to support themselves, right? So to buy for the essentials, rent, food, transportation, healthcare, clothing. So how much does that person need to survive the bare minimum essentials? That money to support the lifestyle is called a living wage. Now, the reason why that there has been such a big push to increase our minimum wage in the last, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years now, is because our minimum wage is no longer a living wage. Therefore, employees who are working full-time, 40 hours a week, at $7.25, they cannot support themselves. So that minimum wage is not a living wage. Now, you might hear people arguing, so what? I mean, nobody forced them to take that minimum wage job, right? So it's their choice. They don't have to take the minimum wage job. But one counter argument I will make, and also many economists will say, is that thinking about the companies, they're paying the minimum wage. Who are they, right? So, for example, McDonald's. Right? McDonald's is one of the biggest offenders. I mean, that corporation is paying a lot of employees minimum wage. Now, right now, that's not the case anymore because right now with the pandemic, we've been having a labor shortage. So many store in McDonald's has to pay people a much higher minimum wage or a much higher wage than the minimum wage. So for example, where I live in downtown Houston, so a while ago, I saw a McDonald's off in my neighborhood. They had a banner outside. It says hiring, new position, or any position, starting pay, $15 per hour, right? So McDonald's actually paying more than 7.25 now, and that's because right now at 7.25, McDonald's cannot hire anybody because nobody wants to work for 7.25. because the other opportunity is just so much higher than 7.25. So to compete, McDonald's now had to pay a higher wage than before. But for the longest time, the wage in McDonald's was kept very, very low. So most employees, most hourly worker in the store were getting paid, minimum wage or barely above minimum wage. So there was a documentary followed some of the employees in the McDonald's in a rural U.S. area, and then one of the assistant manager who has been with the restaurant for 10, 11, 12 years now, her hourly wage was $9.25. So if they're paying a assistant manager $9.25, then you can think about how much they're paying the actual starting pay for new workers, right? So it'll be very, very low. Now, so which means when those workers are not getting a living wage, well, how do they survive? They can get a second job, so working more hours somewhere else, making more money, or they can apply for a government benefit. So think about food stamp, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, right? So those benefits are given to low-income family. Most majority of the low-income family have a full-time worker in the family, so they're working, but the money they make is not enough. And then at the same time, companies like McDonald's are making billions and billions of profit every single year. So it becomes our taxpayer. So those people who are not, getting paid 7.25, but the taxpayers have to subsidize with food stamp, Section 8 housing, Medicaid, just so that employees at McDonald's can still work at 7.25 per hour. I mean, that's not fair, right? So why should we subsidize McDonald's to pay people less, and then our taxpayer are paying a part of this wage over here? So that's one of the reasons why many people across different industry, different area has been asking for a higher minimum wage. But you don't hear that anymore because with the pandemic, we're now having a labor shortage. So the actual wage that's getting paid in many places are now much higher than 7.25. All right, so let's say how this minimum wage works. So let's suppose right now for the market, our current wage between supply and demand, the current wage is at $10 per hour. And then tomorrow government comes in and says, hey, we're gonna place a minimum wage here. And then minimum wage will be placed at $12. Well, that's great, right? So we want to pay people more, then why not? But at $12 on the supply curve, so this is how many people want to work. So at $12, we have 1,600 people who wants to work. But at $12, there are only 700 people that's been demanded by the company. So we have a surplus of 900 laborers. So these 900 people, they are called unemployed. So they're the people who want to work at $12, but we don't have enough job at $12 to employ everybody. So that this higher minimum wage is actually creating more unemployment rate in the economy. So you might even hurt the people you try to help with a higher minimum wage, because imagine that before this $12, that there were $1,200, there were 1,200 people having a job, but with a $12 minimum wage, number of employees went down to only 700. That means this 1,200 people, 500 of them had a job when the wage was $10. But these 500 people don't have a job anymore with a higher minimum wage. So actually hurting those people, right? So that's why whenever we try to introduce a minimum wage, we want to introduce it very sensitively, because if it's too high, you're going to be hurt the people try to help. If it's not high enough, then it wouldn't make a difference anyway, right? So it's a very tricky issue. All right, so next, let's talk about the financial market. So for the financial market, again, we're going to use the supply demand analysis. So the supply for the financial market, they're the people who are giving the money to the banks, to the stock market, to the bond market. So think about individual savers, individual household, foreign investors, domestic investors. So people who are putting money into the market, they're the supply of financial market. And then the demand for financial market, they're the participants who want to borrow money, right? So your companies, your government. By the way, U.S. government, we're a major demand for financial market because our U.S. federal government has a huge national debt. That our national debt as of September 2023, national debt currently is at 32 trillion dollar. Again, this is September 2023. So for those of you guys who are watching this video, sometime later, then go to a website called the usdebtclock.org, and then you can see the up to date level of our national debt. And then I bet you the number is going to be higher when you look at it. Okay. And also financial capital, they're the economic resources in the economy that's measured in money, right? So think about stocks, bond, saving account. Those are financial capitals. Interest rate. Interest rate is the price of borrowed money in the market. And also interest rate is also known as the price of money. We can also call interest rate, for those of you guys who are studying finance, interest rate can also be called as a rate of return, right? So how much is the profit on the investment? That's called interest rate, right? So imagine if I'm putting my money into Bank of America, open a saving account, my return on investment is the interest rate on that saving account. Also known as a usury law. So that's laws imposed on the upper limit of the interest rate the lender can charge. Now, normally we don't do this. Normally our government stay out of it. We allow the financial market to behave according to the market forces. But there are certain situations the government actually step in and put a maximum limit on how much the interest rate can be. So for example, many states put an upper limit how much those overnight lender can charge. So think about, you guys probably see this all over town. Those cash check places that you can borrow money from those cash check places like a couple days in advance. So before you get your paycheck, you can go there, borrow the money. Also, the company actually give out loan if you give them your car title as a collateral, right? So that's also those interest rate in that industry in some states are regulated by the government. So government actually put an upper limit on how much interest rate those companies can charge consumers. And then for the credit card industries, our consumer financial protection law actually put a limit on it. How much the interest rate is on the credit cards. So that limit is at 25%. So companies cannot charge you more than 25% interest whenever you borrow money from credit cards. And that is called usury law. So if you look at this diagram for the financial market, we have the supply of capital. Again, this will be the savers, people who save money in the market. We have the demand for capital. Those will be the companies, firms, investors who want to borrow money. Let's say right now the market is by itself. So we have a equilibrium. So at this equilibrium, this intersection between supply and demand. So at the equilibrium, the market interest rate is currently at 15%. All right, so let's see what happens if government intervene. So government says, hey, we think this market is little off balance. We want to make sure that it's more fair. We're going to make sure that the market has a lower interest rate. So suppose government says the maximum interest rate will be set at 13%. Now, this will be different than your minimum wage because minimum wage, that's the legal minimum. This situation will be the legal maximum. So at a legal maximum, this will cause the interest rate in the market to go down from our equilibrium of 15% to now a 13% interest rate. But according to law of supply, that when the interest rate is lower, then people want to save less money. So you're going to see a lower level of supply on the supply curve. But on the law of demand, when the interest rate is lower, then people want to save more money in the market. right? So, I mean, want to borrow more money from the market. So more demand, lower saving, then you're going to see a shortage of financial capital, right? So there will be more difficult to borrow money because there are less money available to borrow, and also more people want to borrow money. So that shortage will be created. Okay, so that's the opposite of a minimum wage. So minimum wage will cause a surplus in the labor market. Um, this interest rate regulation will cause a shortage in the financial market. All right, so we talked about that already. Okay, so also know also intertemporal decision making. So this is whenever consumers or anybody is making a consumption decision between now and in the future. Because you got to think about, why do we save money? This process of saving money is just used for future consumption. So we're delaying our current consumption for future consumption. And how much the interest rate is will influence the decision, right? So if the interest is very, very high, then people are more likely to delay their consumption. But the interest is very, very low, then we might have people save less money or even borrow more money, right? So that will increase your current consumption, but decrease your future consumption. So the interest rate play a huge determinant factor in our intertemporal decision-making process. So next, let's look at our national debt. Let's look at this $32 trillion. Well, where does the money come from? So who gave us the money? So this is not in your textbook, but for our national debt, about 28% of our national debt is financed overseas. So foreign companies, foreign investors, foreign government give our US government 28% of the money. The other 72% coming from domestically. So domestic savers, consumers, business, banks, investors, they finance 72% of our national debt. So let's say right now we have this supply demand for the financial market for our national debt, and right now we're reached this equilibrium. So for this equilibrium, that we have our certain interest rate, let's call this R0, and then we have our number of quantity of financial capitals. So let's suppose something changed. Um, let's suppose the foreign investors don't want to invest money with US government anymore. Um, they don't like us anymore. And then what happens? Right? So if foreign investors are putting less money into US economy, less money into our national debt, that would reduce the supply of our financial capital. When the supply is reduced, you're going to see a higher interest rate. This will be for everybody. Now, if you're going to save money, that's great, right? Because if you are also supplying for financial capital, when the foreign investor don't give money to US government anymore, then you as an investor, you're going to be better off, because now there's a less competition for your money, and you're going to see a higher interest, less competition for your money. There is a higher interest for the money you're going to save. But for everybody else who is borrow money, that's a terrible news, because we're going to see a higher interest rate when you borrow money. So how much money the foreign investor giving to our US government make a huge difference in the US economy. So in a way, it actually benefit our US economy when we are getting money from foreigners that's investing into our US government debt, because that financial capital is injecting into our US economy, and that will lower the interest rate overall for everybody in the US economy. So when you go buy a new car, when you go buy a new house, and for those of you who are borrowing money for school, your student loan debt, the interest rate is also impacted by all this foreign money given to US government. All right, so lastly, let's look at the demand supply dynamics. So we talked about this in the chapter 3 and chapter 4 already. So on the vertical axis, we have the prices, and then and depends on different market. So we call this usually a price. This might also be called interest rate or the wage in the labor market. And then on the horizontal axis, we have the quantity. But the quantity depends on different market. This might be the number of laborers available. This might be the amount of financial capital, money that's available for investment. So those will be different measurement of quantities, but it's always price on the vertical axis and then quantity on the horizontal axis. And also remember that whenever the supply-demand curve shift, that will cause a change in our demand supply in the equilibrium, right? So because the price and quantity for the market is determined not by buyers or sellers by themselves, it's determined by the interaction between buyers and sellers. So whenever there's a change on either side of the market between buyers and sellers, you're going to see a change in your price and quantity in the market. So in our previous example, when we talk about the labor market, so let's say for nurses, let's suppose in 2020, the minimum wage for the minimum salary for nurses was 75,330. Let's suppose demand for nurses increased, after 2020 or in 2020. Guys, that actually happened because with the pandemic, that there was a huge shortage of nurses. That shortage for nurses because there was a higher demand for nursing, so nurse demand went up. When the nurse demand went up, the pay for nurses also went way up. So if you know anybody who has been working as a nurse from the before pandemic to now, talk to that person because that person probably saw a pretty nice pay increase in the last couple of years because that labor shortage because of higher demand for nurses also caused the wage to go up, right? So this example here is that you're going to see a higher demand for nurse leading to a higher wage and also more quantity, right? So changing demand or supply will cause a change in your price and quantity. And lastly, what if we have two change combined together, right? So again, this is actually real thing happened during the pandemic. So on one end, during the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in the demand for nurses, right? Because there were many COVID patients that and they were staying in the hospital way longer than before, so the demand for nurses went way up. At the same time, the supply for nurses actually went down. And a couple reasons. For one, because many of the nursing school, they weren't able to produce the same number of graduate like before the pandemic. So the overall addition of nurses in the industry went down. And then second, many of the existing nurses just don't want to work anymore because they might be discouraged of the general environment that's putting onto nurses. Many of them, they were burned out, right? They're working too many hours. They're quitting the jobs left and right. So we saw a decrease in the nurses, but we also saw an increase in the demand for nurses. But combine both of them together, the market went from E0 to E1, that's a higher demand, and then to E2, that's a lower supply. So what you see is that the pay for nurses went way higher because of higher demand and also because of lower supply. Now, however, the change in quantity here. Now, whenever the demand is increasing, we're going to see a price increase. We're going to see a quantity increase. Now, whenever the supply is decreasing, we're going to see a price increase. We're going to see a quantity decrease. Now, guys, notice that we're going to see two prices both increasing in the same direction, right? So for sure, when you combine the demand supply change, price will increase for sure by a lot. But the change in demand, the change in quantity is actually uncertain. So notice here says we do not know if number of nurses will increase or decrease. That's because one factor is causing the demand the quantity to go up. One quantity is one the supply is causing the quantity to go down. So when you combine them together, one goes up, one goes down. They don't necessarily cancel each other out entirely, right? So what if our demand is more, or what if our supply change more? Then the change in quantity, without knowing between supply and demand which one change more, the change in quantity, this answer here is, so price will go up and then quantity change is uncertain because we don't know which one change more between supply and demand. Okay, all right guys, that's it for this chapter. Any question, let me know, and then I will see you guys for chapter 5. All right, bye-bye.